The crunch of plastic under a heavy leather boot is a sound I will never forget. It was a sharp, final snap that echoed through the freezing air of Christmas Eve. My husband, Cortez, stood on the porch of our massive stone mansion, his face twisted in a look of pure hatred. Between us stood our 5-year-old son, Kyril. The snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes, clinging to Kyrill's eyelashes. He didn't understand why his father was screaming. He couldn't hear the insults. He only saw the rage in his father's eyes and the sudden, terrifying vibration of the front door slamming against the wall. "I want a son, not a mistake," Cortez roared. His voice was loud enough to rattle the windows, but to Kyril, the world was a void of silence. Cortez reached down and ripped the hearing aids right off our son's ears. He didn't care that he was hurting him. He tossed the delicate devices onto the porch and brought his heel down with a sickening thud. The tiny circuits and plastic casings shattered into 1,000 useless pieces. Kyril let out a silent, confused whimper, reaching for his ears as the last tiny bit of the world's sound vanished into total darkness. "He's a broken toy, Amari's," Cortez shouted at me, shoving me toward the steps. "He embarrasses me. Every time we go to a gala, every time a business partner sees him waving his hands like a freak, my reputation dies a little more. I'm an architect. I build perfection. I won't have a flaw living under my roof." He shoved Kyril into the snow. My heart broke as I watched my little boy tumble into the cold white powder. Before I could reach him, Cortez grabbed my arm, leaving a blossoming bruise on my skin, and shoved me after him. "Go be trash with your trash, son," he spat. He slammed the heavy oak door. I heard the lock click, a sound I felt in my bones more than I heard with my ears. Through the sidelight window, I saw the shadow of a woman. It was Soline, his mistress. She was holding a newborn baby, a boy she had named Jackson. "My perfect son," I heard Cortez say through the glass. "My name is Amari's, and the last thing my husband gave me was a bruise on my arm and a deaf son he claimed was trash." The night was a long, hollow tunnel of cold. I carried Kyril 3 blocks to a lonely bus shelter. He was shivering so hard his teeth should have been rattling, but he was strangely still, his large eyes fixed on my face. He was searching for an explanation I didn't have. I sat on the cold metal bench and pulled him onto my lap, wrapping my coat around him. My hands were shaking so much I could barely move my fingers. I tried to sign "I love you," the way my mother had taught me, but my eyes were blurring with tears. I didn't want him to see me break. I had to be his rock, even if the ground beneath us had turned into a frozen river. I looked back down the street toward the mansion. From this distance, the house looked like a golden jewel. The Christmas lights were twinkling in the windows. I could see Cortez's silhouette in the grand library. He was pouring 2 glasses of champagne. Soline was there, leaning against his shoulder. They were celebrating their perfect, new family while we sat on a bench in the snow. "I'm sorry, Kyril," I whispered into his hair, though I knew he couldn't hear me. "I'm so sorry." The rage began to grow then. It started as a tiny spark deep in my chest, a heat that fought back against the freezing wind. Cortez thought he had won. He thought he could throw us away like garbage and continue his life of luxury and perfection. He thought Kyril was a mistake because he lived in a world of silence. But silence is where you learn to watch. Silence is where you learn to wait. I looked at the house one last time and made a blood vow to the universe. "You will regret this, Cortez," I whispered. "I don't know how, and I don't know when, but you will beg for the forgiveness of the boy you just threw into the street." The bus finally pulled up, its headlights cutting through the dark like a predator's eyes. We got on, leaving our old life behind, and moved into the unknown. The first few years were a blur of exhaustion and hunger. We moved into a tiny, one-room apartment in a part of the city where the streetlights were always broken. I worked 3 jobs just to keep us in bread and milk. In the mornings, I scrubbed the floors of a corporate law firm. In the afternoons, I waited tables at a greasy diner. At night, I sat by a dim lamp and worked as a seamstress, my fingers raw from the needle. Kyril started public school, and it was a nightmare. We couldn't afford new hearing aids, so he went into the world completely deaf. The other kids were cruel. They called him Dummy and the Mute. They would sneak up behind him and push him, laughing because he couldn't hear them coming. One day, he came home with a split lip and a torn shirt. He didn't cry. He just sat at the small kitchen table and drew a picture of a giant wall. He signed to me, his movements sharp and angry. They are loud. I am quiet. They hate the quiet. I don't hate the quiet, I signed back, taking his hands in mine. The quiet is where the truth is. We didn't have money for books or movies, so we made up our own world. We created our own signs, private signals that only we understood. I taught him how to read my lips by candlelight. I would say a word over and over until he could recognize the shape of my mouth, the way my tongue touched my teeth. He was brilliant. While other kids were listening to music or watching TV, Kyril was watching the world. He noticed things no one else did. He noticed the way a person's eyes twitched when they were lying. He noticed the way a hand tightened when someone was nervous. Look at their eyes, Kyril, I would tell him. The ears can be fooled by pretty words. The eyes never lie. We were poor and we were lonely, but we were a unit. It was us against the world, and every day the spark of fire in my chest grew into a steady flame. We weren't just surviving, we were preparing. 10 years passed like a slow-motion movie. Kyril was 15, a tall, lean teenager with eyes like flint. He had grown into a boy who didn't waste a single movement. He was a shadow, moving through the world with a grace that came from never being distracted by noise. One Saturday, we went to the park. It was the only free entertainment we had. We sat on a bench near a fountain, and I watched Kyril. He wasn't playing, he was observing. He tapped my shoulder and pointed to a couple sitting on a bench about 50 feet away. They were too far to hear, but Kyril's eyes were locked on them. They are going to break up, he signed to me. How do you know? I signed back. He is saying he forgot their anniversary again. Kyril's fingers moved with lightning speed. She is saying it's not about the date, it's about the fact that he doesn't see her. She just said, I'm leaving you today, Mark. A moment later, the woman stood up, threw a ring into the fountain and walked away. The man sat there, his head in his hands. I stared at my son in shock. You read all of that from here. Kyril nodded. I can see the words. It's like a movie in my head. People think they are safe because they speak quietly. They don't know I'm reading their secrets. That was the moment I realized Kyril didn't have a disability. He had a superpower. He had developed a sense of observation that was so precise it was forensic. He wasn't broken like Cortez had claimed. He was more complete than anyone I had ever met. You can use this, Kyril, I signed, my heart racing. You can see things other people miss. You can be the one who finds the truth. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw a smile on his face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just found his teeth. He knew then that his silence wasn't a cage. It was his weapon. With Kyril's new confidence, my own life began to shift. I had saved every penny from my 3 jobs, and I finally had enough to take a risk. I noticed that the rich people whose offices I cleaned often bought art that was meaningless. They bought it just because it was expensive. Using my own eye for detail, a skill I had sharpened by raising a visual son, I opened a tiny art gallery in a developing part of the city. I looked for artists who captured the truth Kyril always talked about. I changed our last name. I didn't want to be Amari's Vane anymore. We became Amari's and Kyril Thorne. I wanted to bury our past so deep that Cortez would never find us until we were ready to be found. The gallery was a hit. I had a knack for finding undiscovered talent, and soon the wealthy elite were coming to me. I learned how to move in their circles. I learned how to wear expensive dresses and drink champagne while listening to their shallow gossip. I became a fixture in the art world, fierce, independent, and mysterious. You have such a keen eye, Amari's, they would tell me. I learned from the best, I would reply, thinking of my son. Kyril was at the top of his class. He had used his lip-reading skills to stay ahead of every lecture, and he had learned to speak with an interpreter so he could navigate the hearing world. But he preferred the silence. He said it helped him think. By the time he was 20, he was headed to law school. He wanted to be a corporate defense attorney. Why defense? I asked him one night. Because the powerful people have the most to hide, he signed. and I want to be the one who decides whether their secrets stay hidden or come to light. We were no longer the shivering pair in the bus shelter. We were becoming the people who own the shelter. The vow I had made 10 years ago was starting to take shape. The architect had built a house, but we were building an empire. 5 years later, the legal world had a new name they whispered in fear: the Silent Shark. Kyril was 25, and he was the most terrifying man in a courtroom. He didn't speak. He sat at the defense table in bespoke suits that cost more than a mid-sized car, his eyes scanning the room like a hawk. He had a dedicated interpreter, a woman named Sarah, who voiced his arguments, but everyone knew the brilliance came from the man in the chair. I sat in the back of the courtroom during one of his biggest trials. He was defending a tech giant accused of stealing secrets. The lead witness for the prosecution was on the stand, lying through his teeth. Kyril didn't interrupt. He just watched. Suddenly, he tapped a note for Sarah. "My client would like to point out," Sarah's voice rang through the court, "that the witness just whispered to his lawyer during the sidebar. He told him that the blue folder is in the safe at his summer home." The courtroom went dead silent. The witness turned pale. He had whispered it so quietly that even the court reporter hadn't caught it, but Kyril had seen the movement of his lips from across the room. The judge ordered a search. They found the folder. Kyril won the case in 10 minutes. After the trial, we stood on the courthouse steps. Photographers were snapping pictures of the Silent Shark. Kyril looked at me and signed one word: ready. "Ready for what?" I asked. "The architect," he signed. "I saw the news this morning. His building just collapsed in the stock market. He is in trouble, Mother. The cracks are starting to show." My heart throbbed. For 20 years, I had kept track of Cortez from a distance. I knew he had become one of the most successful architects in the country, but I also knew he was arrogant and sloppy. He thought he was untouchable. He had spent 2 decades building a life with Solene and their perfect son, Jackson. But perfection is a fragile thing, and Kyril was an expert at finding the flaw. While we were rising, Cortez was finally beginning to fall. Inside his glass office at Vane Architecture, the air was thick with panic. Cortez was 60 now, his face bloated from years of expensive scotch, and his temper more volatile than ever. He had spent 20 years pretending he was the king of the city, but the foundation of his kingdom was made of sand. Solene had become a socialite whose only talent was spending money. She had drained his accounts on designer bags, plastic surgery, and trips to the French Riviera. And then there was Jackson. Jackson was the perfect son Cortez had traded us for, but Jackson was a disaster. He was a college dropout who spent his nights at underground gambling dens and his days asking his father for more investments. He was spoiled, lazy, and arrogant, the very things Cortez used to claim he hated. The hammer finally fell on a Tuesday morning. The FBI raided Vane Architecture. They marched through the glass doors, carrying boxes and serving warrants. Cortez was led out in handcuffs in front of a dozen news cameras. He was being charged with a massive embezzlement scheme. $50 million was missing from the city's pension fund, which had been managed by his firm. "It's a mistake," Cortez screamed at the cameras, his face turning a dark, dangerous red. "I'm an architect. I don't touch the money. My wife and son handle the books." But nobody was listening. The news cycle was brutal. Architect of Greed read the headlines. All of his assets were frozen. His prestigious friends vanished like smoke. I watched the footage on the big screen in my gallery. I saw the man who had shoved a 5-year-old into the snow, looking small and pathetic in a cheap holding cell. "The trap is set," I whispered to the empty room. "Now we just wait for him to realize there's only one person who can pull him out of it." Cortez spent 3 days in a holding cell. He called every major law firm in the city. One by one, they all turned him down. "The evidence is too strong, Cortez," one of his old friends told him over the phone. "The money was moved through your private accounts. Your signature is on every wire transfer. Taking your case is professional suicide." He was a monster in the eyes of the public. He had stolen from retired teachers and firefighters. No one wanted to be associated with him. Soline, the woman he had chosen over me, was the first to run. The moment the accounts were frozen, she fled to a high-end hotel using a secret credit card she'd hidden from him. She gave a press conference claiming she was a victim of her husband's secrets. She said she had no idea what he was doing and that she was filing for divorce. Jackson was nowhere to be found. He had disappeared the moment the FBI arrived, likely afraid they would find his own gambling debts tied to the stolen funds. Cortez was alone. He sat on a metal cot in a cell that smelled of bleach and despair. He was no longer the man in the bespoke suit. He was a broken man in an orange jumpsuit, staring at a wall. "There has to be someone," he begged the court-appointed advisor. "I have money hidden. I can pay. I just need someone who isn't afraid of the government." The advisor looked at a list on his clipboard. "There is one firm, Cortez. They're called Vanguard Legal. They specialize in impossible corporate defense. They are the most expensive and most feared firm in the state." "Tell them I'll pay triple," Cortez shouted. "Who is the lead lawyer?" "He goes by K," the advisor said. "But he's unconventional. He doesn't take every case. You'll have to convince him." Cortez gripped the bars of his cell. "Get him here, now." The call came to Kyrill's office that afternoon. I was there, sitting in a leather chair, watching him work. He looked at the caller ID and then at me. "He's calling," Kyrill signed. "Are you going to go?" I asked. My heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my throat. "Yes," Kyrill signed, "but not as his son, as his savior. I want to see the look on his face when he realizes he is drowning and I am the only boat." I drove him to the jail the next morning. I didn't go inside. I parked the car across the street and watched the heavy metal doors. My mind went back 20 years to the sound of the hearing aids breaking under Cortez's boot. I remembered the cold and the hunger. "Make him beg, Kyrill," I signed as he got out of the car. Kyrill adjusted his suit jacket. He looked like a god of justice, tall, powerful, and utterly cold. He walked into the jail with Sarah, his interpreter, following a step behind him. Inside the meeting room, Cortez was waiting. He was packing like a caged animal. When the door opened, he turned around, his eyes wild with hope. He saw a handsome young man in a suit that cost more than his remaining life savings. He saw a man who radiated power. Cortez didn't recognize him. How could he? The last time he saw Kyrill, he was a crying 5-year-old in a snowbank. He had never imagined that the broken boy would grow into this. "You're Kay?" Cortez asked, rushing toward the table. "Thank God you came. You have to help me. They're trying to bury me. My wife, my son, they're all gone. I'm innocent, I swear." Kyrill sat down slowly. He didn't say a word. He didn't even look at Cortez's face. He looked at his hands, watching the way they trembled. Sarah sat next to Kyrill. "My client will listen," she said, "but you will speak only when he allows it." Cortez sat down, leaning across the table. He started talking a mile a minute, explaining the wire transfers, blaming his accountants, and cursing the FBI. He was desperate to look like a victim. Kyrill watched him. He didn't blink. He was reading Cortez's lips, catching the tiny hesitations, the way he skipped over certain names. Sarah spoke for Kyrill. "My client has a condition for taking this case." "Anything," Cortez said. "Name it." "During the duration of the trial, you will grant Vanguard legal total control of your remaining assets," Sarah said. "Every deed, every frozen account, every piece of property. It must be placed in a legal trust managed by this firm. This is to ensure that your legal fees are secured and that the government cannot seize them before we win." Cortez hesitated. That was everything he had left. Total control, that's a lot to ask. "My client doesn't work for free," Sarah said. "And he doesn't work for people who don't trust him. If you want the silent shark to defend you, you give him the keys to the kingdom. If not, you can take your chances with a public defender." Cortez looked at Kyrill. He saw the cold, unwavering gaze. He saw a man who looked like he could win a war without firing a shot. Cortez was a gambler, and he was cornered. He thought he was being smart. If he moved his assets to the law firm, the government couldn't touch them. "Fine," Cortez said, grabbing a pen. I'll sign, just get me out of here. Kyril watched him sign the contract. As Cortez pushed the paper across the table, Kyril leaned forward. For the first time, he looked Cortez directly in the eyes. He didn't sign anything. He didn't move. He just stared until Cortez shifted uncomfortably. The architect is signing his own demolition notice. Kyril signed to Sarah as they stood up to leave. Sarah didn't translate that part. She just gathered the papers and followed Kyril out. Cortez stood there, watching them go, unaware that he had just handed his life to the boy he had thrown into the street. Kyril began his investigation that night. While the rest of the city was sleeping, he was in his office, surrounded by screens and documents. He didn't need to hear the numbers, he could see the patterns. He found the truth within 4 hours. Solene and Jackson hadn't just fled. They had been the architects of the embezzlement. Solene had used her access to Cortez's private computer to forge his digital signature on dozens of wire transfers. Jackson had used the money to pay off massive gambling debts in the Caymans. They had set Cortez up to be the fall guy. They wanted him to go to prison so they could live off the millions they had hidden in offshore accounts. Kyril leaned back in his chair, his eyes glowing in the dark. He had the evidence to clear Cortez of the $50 million theft. He could save him. But he didn't call the police. He didn't even tell me right away. I want them to eat each other, he signed to me the next morning at breakfast. If I reveal the truth now, Solene and Jackson will just disappear. I want them all in the same room. I want them to look at each other and realize they are all monsters. What about Cortez? I asked. Are you going to let him go free? Kyril looked at his hands. He is innocent of this crime, Mother, but he is guilty of 20 years of others. I found something else in his files, something he didn't even know he left behind. What? Tax evasion, Kyril signed. He hasn't paid a full cent of taxes in 20 years. He's been hiding his architectural fees in shell companies since the day he threw us out. The government doesn't know yet, but they will. I realized then that Kyril wasn't just defending Cortez. He was performing a surgery. He was going to cut out the cancer of our past, but he was going to do it in a way that left nothing but ashes. The bail hearing is tomorrow, I said. I'm going. Wear your best dress, Kyril signed. I want him to see what he lost. The courtroom for the bail hearing was packed with reporters. When Cortez was let in, he looked terrible. His hair was messy, his skin was gray, and he was shaking. He looked like a man who was already halfway to the grave. Then, the doors at the back of the room opened. I walked in. I was wearing a black silk dress that cost more than a year's rent in our old apartment. I had a diamond necklace that caught the light and hair that was perfectly styled. I looked like a queen. I walked to the front row and sat down. Cortez's head snapped toward me. His eyes went wide. He stared at me, his mouth hanging open. Amaris, he whispered. His voice was cracked and weak. I didn't look at him. I looked at the judge. I looked at the flag. I looked at my son, who was sitting at the defense table. I'm sorry, do I know you? I said, my voice loud enough for the first few rows to hear. My tone was polite, distant, and utterly cold. Cortez looked like he had been punched. It's me, Cortez Amaris. I looked for you. I regretted everything. Silence in the court. The judge barked. Kyril stood up. He didn't look at his father. He didn't look at me. He looked at the judge, and Sarah began to speak for him. Your Honor, my client is prepared to post the full bail amount through a secured legal trust. We have the funds ready. The judge looked surprised. $50 million in cash. Yes, Your Honor. The bail was granted. Cortez was released into Kyril's custody. As we walked out of the courthouse, the paparazzi swarmed us. Cortez tried to reach for my arm, just like he had 20 years ago. I stepped back, letting one of my security guards move between us. Don't touch me, Mr. Vane, I said. I'm only here to see the show. I got into my car and drove away, leaving Cortez standing on the steps with the son he didn't recognize. The debt had just started to accumulate, and I knew Cortez would have to pay it back with interest. Cortez followed Kyril back to the Vanguard legal offices. He was babbling, trying to thank Kay for the bail, while also trying to ask about me. "How is she so rich?" Cortez asked Sarah. "Where has she been? Why didn't she come to me?" Sarah ignored him. She was busy setting up a meeting room. "I need to talk to her," Cortez insisted. "I need to apologize. I've had a hard time, Kay, my wife Solene. She's a snake. And my son Jackson, he's useless. He's nothing like me." Kyril sat at the head of the table. He watched Cortez's lips move. He watched the way Cortez dismissed his perfect son now that he was no longer useful. Sarah spoke for Kyril. "My client is not interested in your family drama. He is interested in the facts. We have discovered that your wife and son are the ones who moved the money." Cortez stopped talking. His eyes went cold. "I knew it, those bastards. They wanted to ruin me." "We can prove it," Sarah said. "But you must follow our instructions exactly. You are to stay at a secured hotel we have provided. You are to have no contact with Solene or Jackson. If you speak to them, we drop your case and keep the collateral." "I won't speak to them," Cortez spat. "I want them to rot." Kyril watched him. He saw the same man who had thrown us away now wanting to throw away his second family. Cortez hadn't changed. He didn't love people. He only loved the reflection of himself in them. When that reflection got dirty, he smashed the mirror. Kyril stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city he now partially owned. He was the architect now, and the building he was designing for Cortez didn't have any exits. "He thinks he's the victim again," Kyril signed to me later that night. "He can't even see that he's the one who taught them how to be monsters." "When are you going to tell him?" I asked. "Soon," Kyril signed. "The trial starts in 3 days. I want him to have hope. Hope is the thing that makes the fall hurt the most." The night before the trial, Cortez tracked me down at my gallery. I was closing up when he appeared at the glass door, looking desperate. "Amari's, please," he said as I let him in. "Just 5 minutes." I stood behind my desk, the light of the gallery reflecting off the expensive paintings on the walls. "What do you want, Cortez?" "I'm sorry," he said, stepping into the room. He looked around at the art. "You've done so well. I should have been there. I should have helped you." "You did help me," I said. "You threw me out. You showed me that I couldn't rely on anyone but myself. You were the best teacher I ever had." "I was stressed," he shouted, his old temper flaring for a second before he caught himself. "The firm was struggling. Kyril, he was a lot of work. I didn't think I could handle it." "He wasn't work, Cortez. He was a gift. You were just too blind to see it." "I know that now," Cortez said. "This lawyer, Kay, he's brilliant. He's the only one who didn't turn his back on me. He's a good man, even if he, has that problem." "That problem?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "His deafness," Cortez said, waving a hand. "It's a shame. He could be even bigger if he were normal. But he's smart, I'll give him that. He's the kind of son I always wanted." I felt a cold laugh bubble up in my throat. He was praising the man he had discarded, while still insulting the very thing that made him great. "You don't deserve a son like him," I said. "I'm going to make it up to him," Cortez said. "Once I win this trial, I'll hire him. We'll be a team. Vane and Thorn, it has a ring to it, doesn't it?" I recorded the entire conversation on my phone. Every word of his arrogance, every insult to Kyril's disability. "Go back to your hotel, Cortez," I said. "You have a big day tomorrow." The trial was a media circus. Solene was there, sitting on the prosecution's side, wearing a black veil like she was at a funeral. Jackson was next to her, looking bored and tapping his phone. Cortez sat at the defense table, leaning toward Kyril. He kept trying to whisper things to him, forgetting that Kyril couldn't hear him. "Kay, look at her," Cortez whispered. "She's a liar. Tell the judge she's a liar." Kyril didn't look at him. He was focused on the jury. During the first break, Cortez followed Kyril into the hallway. He was frustrated. He didn't like being ignored by the man who was supposed to be his partner. "Listen, Kay," Cortez said, stepping in front of Kyril. "I know you're doing a great job, but you need to be more aggressive. You need to humiliate them. And when we're done, I have a big offer for you. I'm going to make you a partner at my firm. You won't have to be the deaf lawyer anymore. You'll just be a Vane." Kyril stopped walking. He looked at Cortez for a long time. The silence between them was thick, heavy with 20 years of history. Kyril didn't wait for Sarah this time. He raised his hands and signed directly to Cortez's face. His movements were sharp, elegant, and full of power. Cortez stared at him, confused. What? What are you doing? I don't understand that hand stuff. Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. My client says, I don't need ears to hear that you are a liar, Father. The world seemed to stop. Cortez froze. His eyes darted from Sarah to Kyril. Father, Cortez whispered. What did you call me? Kyril stepped closer until he was inches from Cortez's face. He signed again, his eyes burning into his father's soul. I am the boy you threw into the snow, Sarah translated. I am the broken toy you tried to smash. And right now, I am the only thing keeping you out of a cage. Cortez staggered back, his back hitting the cold marble wall of the courthouse. He looked at Kyril, really looked at him, and finally saw the 5-year-old boy in the flint-gray eyes of the man. Kyril, he gasped. Kyril didn't stay to watch him crumble. He turned and walked back into the courtroom, leaving Cortez alone in the hallway, gasping for air like he was drowning in the very snow he had shoved us into. When the trial resumed, Cortez was a different man. He sat at the table, staring at Kyril with a mix of awe and terror. He tried to play the proud dad card during the next sidebar, leaning in and nodding as if he were in on a secret. That's my boy, he whispered to the person next to him. I knew he'd be great. Kyril ignored him completely. To Kyril, Cortez wasn't a father, he was a case file. He was a job that needed to be finished. The psychological torture was subtle but devastating. Every time Cortez tried to catch Kyril's eye, Kyril would look right through him. Every time Cortez tried to touch his arm, Kyril would shift away. Solene and Jackson were watching from across the room. They could see the tension. They didn't know the secret yet, but they could see that the silent shark was no longer just a lawyer. He was a weapon. During the afternoon session, Solene took the stand. She gave a performance worthy of an Oscar. She cried about how Cortez forced her to help him hide the money. She said he threatened to leave her and Jackson with nothing if they didn't comply. He's a monster, she sobbed into a silk handkerchief. He only cares about his reputation. He would throw his own family under a bus to save himself. The irony was thick enough to choke on. I watched from the front row, catching Kyril's eye for a split second. He gave me a tiny, almost invisible nod. He was letting them lie. He was letting them build their own gallows. No further questions, Sarah said for Kyril after Solene finished her testimony. Cortez was furious. Why didn't you cross-examine her? She's lying, you're letting her win. Kyril didn't answer. He just tapped his pen on the table. He knew something Cortez didn't. He knew that Jackson was about to make a very big mistake. After the court adjourned for the day, Jackson, the perfect son, decided to take matters into his own hands. He followed Kyril into the parking garage. Hey, silent shark, Jackson shouted, walking toward Kyril. Kyril didn't turn around. He didn't have to. He saw Jackson's reflection in the glass of a car. Jackson caught up and grabbed Kyril's shoulder, spinning him around. Jackson was 20 now, dressed in a designer suit that looked ridiculous on his soft, pampered body. I know what you're doing, Jackson sneered. You think you can save the old man? You think you can take our money? Listen to me, you freak. You throw this case. You let my dad go to jail, and you let us keep the Cayman accounts, or I'll make sure your mother has a very bad accident. Jackson leaned in, his face inches from Kyril's. He spoke slowly and loudly, thinking Kyril was stupid because he was deaf. We took the money, Jackson bragged, his lips moving in exaggerated shapes. We forged the signatures. We did it all while the old man was passed out on scotch, and there's nothing you can do about it. Now you tell the judge he's guilty, or I'll find Amari's. Kyril didn't move. He didn't look scared. He just watched Jackson's mouth. He was reading every word, every threat, every confession. And more importantly, the tiny lens of the hidden body cam in Kyril's tie was recording everything. Kyril raised his hands and signed one thing. Sarah wasn't there to translate, but Jackson didn't need to hear it. Kyrill's eyes said it all. He turned and walked away, leaving Jackson standing in the dark garage, laughing like he had already won. Jackson thought silence meant weakness. He didn't know that for Kyrill, silence was a trap. That night, Cortez was in a panic. He called Kyrill's office 10 times. When Kyrill finally let him in, Cortez was packing the floor. Jackson said you met him in the garage, Cortez said. He said you're going to throw the case. Is that true? Are you going to betray me too? Kyrill sat at his desk. He pushed a document across the table toward Cortez. I have a strategy, Sarah translated, but you must protect what you have left. The government is moving to seize your mansion as part of the embezzlement investigation. If they take it, you will be homeless before the trial is even over. I know, Cortez cried. That house is everything, it's my legacy. Transfer the deed to Vanguard Legal, Sarah said. We will hold it as legal collateral for your fees. As a protected legal asset, the government cannot seize it while the trial is ongoing. It will be safe in our hands. Cortez didn't even hesitate. He was so terrified of losing his status, his stone palace, that he would have signed anything. He grabbed the pen and scribbled his name on the deed transfer. Thank you, Kyrill, Cortez said, his voice actually sounding thick with emotion. I knew I could trust you. I'm going to make this right. When this is over, we'll move back into the house together. You, me, and Amari's, just like it should have been. Kyrill watched him. He saw the man who had slammed the door on us 20 years ago, now begging to be let back in. The house is safe, Kyrill signed. Cortez left the office feeling like a king again. He didn't realize that the deed he had just signed was for the very same mansion where he had smashed Kyrill's hearing aids. And he didn't realize that in Kyrill's hands, safe meant something very different than what he imagined. The final day of the trial arrived. The courtroom was overflowing with people. Solene sat in the witness stand, ready for her final cross-examination. She looked at Cortez with a smug, victorious smile. She thought she had him. Kyrill stood up. He walked to the center of the room. He didn't bring any papers. He just looked at Solene. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, you may begin. Kyrill didn't ask a question. He signaled to Sarah, who pointed to the large monitor on the wall. We would like to submit Exhibit G, Sarah said. The screen flickered to life. It was a silent video, grainy and shot from a distance. It was the footage Kyrill had captured in the parking garage. In the video, Jackson was screaming at Kyrill. There was no sound, but Jackson's face was clear. His mouth was moving in large, angry shapes. What is this? The prosecutor shouted. There is no audio. This is useless. My client disagrees, Sarah said calmly. We would like to call our expert witness, a forensic lip reader certified by the state. A woman walked to the stand. She looked at the video. I can translate this with 99% accuracy, she said. She began to read the video live. We took the money. We forged the signatures. We did it all while the old man was passed out. Tell the judge he's guilty, or I'll find Amari's. The courtroom erupted. Solene turned white. Jackson, who was sitting in the front row, tried to stand up and run, but 2 bailiffs immediately blocked his path. It's a lie, Solene screamed. He's making it up. You can't hear what he's saying. I don't need to hear it, Kyrill signed, and Sarah's voice was like a hammer. I saw it, and now the whole world sees it. The evidence was undeniable. The forensic lip reader went through the video frame by frame, matching Jackson's movements to the confession. Solene began to break. She looked at Jackson, then at the judge, then at the police officers moving toward her. She realized the silent shark hadn't just defended Cortez, he had hunted her. It was Jackson's idea, Solene suddenly shrieked, pointing at her son. He had the gambling debts. He told me how to do it. He said the old man was too stupid to notice. You witch, Jackson yelled, lunging toward his mother. The bailiffs tackled Jackson to the ground. Solene was sobbing, her perfect facade completely destroyed. They were both handcuffed in front of a dozen cameras. Cortez stood up, his face glowing with triumph. You did it. Kyrill, you did it. I'm free. I knew you were the best. He turned to the jury, waving his hands. "See, I'm innocent. My son saved me. My brilliant, perfect son." The judge banged the gavel. "Order, order in the court." The prosecutor stood up, looking defeated. "Your Honor, in light of this evidence, the state moves to dismiss all embezzlement charges against Cortez Vane and move forward with charges against Soline and Jackson Vane." "Dismissed," the judge said. Cortez laughed, a loud, arrogant sound that filled the room. He turned to Kyril, reaching out to hug him. "Let's go home, son. Let's celebrate." Kyril stepped back. He didn't hug him. He didn't even smile. He looked at the judge and raised his hand. "Wait," Sarah said. "My client has one more piece of evidence to submit to the court." Cortez stopped laughing. What are you doing? We won." Kyril looked at his father. "The truth isn't finished yet," he signed. The room went quiet again. Cortez looked confused, his eyes darting between Kyril and the judge. "Mr. Thorne," the judge asked, "the embezzlement charges are dismissed. What else could there be?" "During the process of discovery for the embezzlement case," Sarah voiced for Kyril, "my client had to review 20 years of Vane Architecture's financial records. While he found that Mr. Vane was innocent of the $50 million theft, he discovered something else." Kyril placed a thick stack of blue folders on the prosecutor's desk. "Evidence of systematic tax evasion spanning 2 decades, Sarah said. "My client found that Cortez Vane has hidden over $100 million in offshore shell companies to avoid federal taxes since the year 2006. Cortez's face went from triumph to a sickly, pale green. "What? You can't do that. You're my lawyer. You're supposed to protect me." "As an officer of the court," Sarah's voice was cold and professional, "my client cannot knowingly withhold evidence of active, ongoing crimes. To do so would be a violation of his legal ethics and grounds for disbarment. He is required by law to surrender this evidence." "You traitor!" Cortez screamed, lunging across the table toward Kyril. Kyril didn't flinch. He just watched Cortez's lips as he cursed at him. He watched the man who had once claimed he was broken, now being broken by the very boy he had discarded. The prosecutor grabbed the folders, his eyes widening as he scanned the first few pages. "Your Honor, this is massive. This is billions in unpaid taxes and penalties." The judge looked at Cortez with pure disgust. "Mr. Vane, it appears your celebration was premature." I sat in the front row, watching my son. He had done it. He had cleared the name of the man who birthed him, only to destroy the man who had abandoned him. It was a perfect, silent execution. The sentencing was held a week later. Cortez sat at the defense table, but he didn't have a lawyer from Vanguard Legal anymore. He had a public defender, a young, tired-looking man who didn't even want to be there. Kyril and I sat in the gallery, watching. "Cortez Vane," the judge said, looking down from the bench, "you have been found guilty of 20 years of tax fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. You have lived a life of luxury built on theft from the very city that made you famous." "I gave this city everything," Cortez shouted, but his voice was thin. "I built the skyline." "You built a monument to your own ego," the judge replied. "I sentence you to 10 years in federal prison. All of your remaining assets, including the funds in your legal trust, are to be seized by the state to pay for back taxes and penalties." Cortez let out a cry of agony. He looked at Kyril, his eyes begging for a miracle that wasn't coming. "The trust," Cortez screamed. "The mansion, you said it was safe." Kyril stood up. He walked to the rails separating the gallery from the court. He signed one last time, and for the first time he signed slowly, so Cortez could see every movement. "The mansion is safe," Sarah translated. "But not for you. You signed the deed over to my firm as collateral. And because you are now a convicted felon who cannot pay his legal fees, the property belongs to Vanguard Legal." Cortez collapsed into his chair. He had lost everything. His wife was in prison. His perfect son was in prison. And the house he had built was now owned by the boy he had kicked into the snow. As the bailiffs led him away in handcuffs, he stopped in front of me. "Amaris, please, don't let him do this. I'm an old man. I won't survive 10 years. I looked at him, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no hate, just the quiet satisfaction of a vow kept. I leaned in and signed to him, a sign I knew he remembered from when he was a boy. I tapped my chin and then my heart. You gave us nothing, Cortez, I said, my voice steady. We built this. 6 months later, the snow was falling again. It was Christmas Eve. Kyril and I stood on the porch of the stone mansion. The house was no longer a cold, dark place of secrets and arrogance. It was bright. It was filled with light. A large sign had been installed out front. It was made of glass and steel, and it glowed with a soft, blue light. The AMARIS Center, for Deaf ARTS. We had spent the last few months gutting the inside of the house, turning the grand ballrooms into studios and the library into a school. It was now a place for children who lived in silence to find their voices. Kyril stood by the front door. He was holding a small box. Inside was a new doorbell system he had designed himself. He pressed the button, and instead of a loud, jarring ring, the entire porch was bathed in a gentle, flashing light. He smiled at me, a real warm smile. No more noise, he signed. No more noise, I agreed. We walked inside and closed the door. The house was warm. It smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke. We were no longer the ghosts of the past. We were the architects of the future. Somewhere in a cold cell, Cortez was listening to the sound of iron doors locking. But here, in this house, there was only the beautiful, powerful sound of silence. And for the first time in 20 years, we were finally, truly home. The center flourished. Within a year, it became the heart of the community. Children who had been told they were broken came to us and learned that they were gifted. They learned how to paint, how to dance, and how to use their eyes to see the truth, just like Kyril had. Kyril didn't stop being a lawyer. He became the city's leading advocate for disability rights. He used the money he had taken from Cortez to fund legal clinics all over the country. He became a hero, not just for the silent shark trials, but for the lives he changed. I often sat in the garden of the mansion, watching the kids play. Sometimes, I would think about that night 20 years ago. I would think about the crunch of the hearing aids under Cortez's boot. It used to be a memory that brought me pain, but now it was a memory that brought me peace. Because without that snap, without that fire, we wouldn't be here. Cortez had tried to break us, but all he had done was forge us into something stronger. He had tried to build a wall, but we had turned it into a bridge. One day, I received a letter from the prison. It was from Cortez. It was a long, rambling apology, filled with pleas for money and visits. He said he was sick. He said he was lonely. I didn't show it to Kyril. I didn't even read the whole thing. I walked to the fireplace, the same one where Cortez used to drink his expensive scotch, and I tossed the letter into the flames. I watched the paper curl and turn to ash. The words vanished into the heat, becoming nothing but smoke. The past was gone. The architect had been forgotten, and the boy who couldn't hear was now the only one whose voice mattered. Kyril walked into the garden, his hands tucked into his pockets. He looked at the fireplace, then at me. He knew exactly what I had done. He's still trying to talk. Kyril signed with a small smirk. He doesn't realize that no one is listening. I signed back. Kyril sat down next to me. He looked up at the house, his eyes soft. Do you think Grandpa would have liked this? I think he would have loved it, I said. He always said the eyes are the windows to the soul, and this house has a very beautiful soul now. Kyril reached out and took my hand. We sat there in the quiet for a long time, watching the sun set over the city. The skyline was beautiful, but it wasn't the buildings that mattered. It was the people inside them. The silent shark was finally at rest. The mother was finally at peace. We got up and walked back toward the house. As we reached the door, the lights of the mansion began to flash, a silent, beautiful welcome. We stepped inside and closed the door on the cold. We were warm, we were together, and we were finally perfectly whole.